Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for giving us such a wonderful day since this morning. This is our first International Sustainability in Teaching and Research Symposium, which a few of us thought would be very, very critical at this time to organize. But at the time, when we planned this, we thought early June would be a very nice time to have it when classes are over and high schools are still in session, college sessions are over. But we didn't realize at the time that all our summer classes would be online. So we do have that little bit of a learning or takeaway from this symposium. But we do have some dedicated Monmouth University students who have presented. Several of them are here in this room. Several of them have been with us throughout the day. And we have some student volunteers who also have been doing wonderful work. So before we begin this significant event of keynote address, can we acknowledge and recognize all of the students here, whether you're high school or Monmouth students. Let's just give a round of applause to all students. Thank you. I began with students because really this symposium was inspired by our thinking that as adults, I shared this at our earlier panel today, as adults, or when you look at climate crisis and the climate urgency, the way the youth looks at it, the young people around us, it does feel like we feel guilty to even think about the world we are leaving for them and the future generations. So that, with that, and also with the passion we have seen in some of the works, we just came downstairs and upstairs, there were high school students presenting. We have Danielle Lee and her, is Danielle here? Her book, I hope you all had a chance to see that. We have Tiyasha Sarkar here. You've seen, I learned about fast fashion from her presentation. And all of the times, and every time I look at a pair of blue jeans, I think twice now, right? So there's so much to learn from our youngsters, and so I wanted to start this introduction. I am Rekha Datta. I'm a professor of political science here and the Freed Endowed Chair of Social Science, one of the sponsors of this symposium. I'm very, very pleased to welcome you all to our keynote address here. It will be delivered by Mr. Omar Hernandez, who is the program manager of United Nations Academic Impact. Monmouth University, and specifically its Institute for Global Understanding, has a special, dear, symbiotic relationship with the United Nations Academic Impact. We were, as Fred Atchison would call it, present at the creation. We were one of the founding members institutions, along with, of course, UNAI, of the United Nations Academic Impact. And I have to also remember the good work of Omar's predecessor, Ramu Damodaran, who was the first UNAI chief, and Monmouth University became aligned and allied with the goal of the United Nations Academic Impact, which, if you want to find out, is probably one of the most direct connections any UN agency has with institutions of education, higher education, including high schools, in universities all over the world. And this has been a great vehicle and tool for us, as well as a good philosophy to follow the Charter of the United Nations through specific objectives and projects that we were able to, over the last more than a decade, align with the work of the United Nations. The United Nations Academic Impact has been very gracious to us and allowed us to host Monmouth University students at panels at the United Nations. And when many of those students graduated, they said that was one of the most significant experiences in their 4 years at Monmouth. So I could go on, but you have not come to listen to me to speak. Today is, this afternoon's session is all about the United Nations academic impact. I'm keen to know what is happening what has been happening since COVID, and we have none other than Omar Hernandez to share that. To introduce Mr. Hernandez, I would like to welcome Lenien Jamir. She is our star Monmouth University athlete. She's on the tennis team, and she actually comes from a remote state of Nagaland in India. And if you go to Olympic.com, you will find a feature article on her as, and I'm probably not, doing justice to it, but probably one of the first from that area to get a scholarship to study in the United States. And Len is a rising senior. She's done wonderful things, including some research projects that she's continuing to help me with. So Len, please, would you help me introduce Mr. Omar Hernandez? Thank you.
Wow, that was really nice. I'm still blushing. Thank you, Professor Datta. I have the privilege of introducing Mr. Omar Hernandez here today. He currently serves as the Program Manager of the United Nations Academic Impact Initiative and holds a position at the Secretariat of the Committee on Information of the United Nations General Assembly. With a strong background within the United Nations system, Mr. Hernandez has also served as a volunteer and conference management specialist at the United Nations Climate Change Secretariat. He has also worked as a consultant for the Education for Justice Initiative of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. Mr. Hernandez's dedication to global causes extends beyond his UN roles. He has volunteered at the Liaison Office of the United Nations Agency for Palestine Refugees and at the New York office of the World Federations of the United Nations Associations. In his home country of Venezuela, he worked as an international news analyst and editor at a newspaper and served as a temporary correspondent at the United Nations in Geneva. Additionally, he was a counselor and human rights trainer for the United Nations Association of Venezuela. As an esteemed member of the Academic Council on the United Nations system, Mr. Hernandez has lectured on international journalism, international public law, and international human rights law at the Andres Bello Catholic University in Venezuela. His research on multilateral affairs has contributed to a deeper understanding of global dynamics. He is fluent in Spanish, English, and French, enabling effective communication across diverse cultures. He holds a master's degree in cooperation for development with a specialization in international humanitarian aid and a diploma of advanced studies in the freedom of expression and right to information, and a bachelor's degree in international studies from Venezuela, where he graduated with honors. With his remarkable professional track record and commitment to global progress, Omar Hernandez is an exemplary leader dedicated to creating a more inclusive and sustainable world, and we are lucky to have him here today. Please welcome Mr. Omar Hernandez.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much indeed to Monmouth University for the invitation to participate in this symposium, also to speak on behalf not only of the United Nations Academic Impact, but also on behalf of the United Nations Secretariat, which is your home, is our home. I would like to start with that. If you read the United Nations Charter, the preamble says with the peoples of the United Nations. It doesn't say with the government, it doesn't say with the president, it doesn't say we, the heads of state. It says we, the people. The peoples is literally everybody. It's literally all of us. And the principles and the purposes that we try to foster and to advocate for, we work for on a daily basis, they are our values, our principles. So the United Nations headquarters in New York and the different offices of the UN around the world are also your house, is your homes. And while most people identify the UN as the UN building, the Secretarial building in New York, not far from here, in which I have the privilege to work, actually, most of the staff of the UN is not in New York. The UN staff and the work of the UN is held where nobody wants to be. In South Sudan, in Afghanistan, where everybody left, the UN stayed behind. In Myanmar, in Ukraine, inside of the cities where they're currently being bombed, that's where you can find the UN. When there was a crisis provoked by the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, there was a surge in food insecurity in Africa. The UN is the one that's still there along with Turkey to guarantee at the very least that specific consequences of the current conflict is at least trying to be resolved to help those in need, especially in the Sahel region in Africa. When you see a refugee camp, when you see the symbols of most of the perhaps most known entities of the UN, the World Food Program, UNICEF, UNSCR, that's us, that's the United Nations. So when you see people fleeing their countries because of the fear of persecution, because they are fleeing from hunger, when you see people that are living in countries affected by natural disasters, when you see people in developing countries starting to survive, you always see there the flag of the UN, and the flag of the UN is a flag of the world. It's a flag that not only has the actual planet Earth on it, but it means that the flag gives hope to people. And the UN, of course, is an international organization, but it's rather an intergovernmental organization. So those who have the lead, of course, are member states, and the UN Charter recognizes that. Having said that, over the past few years, the UN has also understood that it's a critical importance to work with other stakeholders. And the UN started a long time ago a work with civil society organizations, with NGOs, and then we started to work with the private sector companies around the world. And then somebody thought, well, universities, those centers of knowledge, those centers of expertise, we should work with universities too. So a former Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, in 2010, decided let's create an entity within the US Secretariat that now we call the United Nations Academic Impact. We are the only entity in the entire United Nations system that was expressly created to work with universities and colleges. And I always say I'm a little bit biased because as I was introduced, I was a lecturer at a university for more than 15 years. So I'm kind of biased in favor of universities and colleges, and that's why I work now. It's also really funny to work in the other side of the equation now with the United Nations with these institutions of higher education. So with your indulgence, I think that this doesn't work, but I don't know if someone can tell me maybe. Yeah, shoot. Yeah, perfect. So UNI, as I said, was created in 2010, and the UN tried to use UNI as a channel not only to communicate with universities and colleges in a passive manner. And actually, I must be very frank, the initial idea of the UN Academic Impact was we were going to disseminate information about the different campaigns and initiatives of the United Nations with the expectation that these members of ours were going to amplify such messages. And that's fine. That's part of the things that we still do. But we have understood, especially in the past few years, and especially since the SDGs were adopted in 2015, that we need much more than that. So what we do right now is that we are promoting the work that universities are doing. And I'm going to explain in a moment why we are doing that. We are also taking advantage of the expertise within universities, and we are connecting the universities with the rest of the UN system because we need what's going on in the research centers, groups, labs of the different universities. If you read, for instance, now that climate change is such an important topic for us and for the rest of the world, You have probably seen that the report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the so-called IPCC. If you read the composition of the IPCC, I would say 1.5 of the members of such panel are actually academics in the universities. If you read the reports of the special procedures of the Human Rights Council, I'm talking about the special rapporteurs that speak about many different issues concerning the human rights field. Also, most of the inputs are coming from academics. So academics are actually there. And again, I used to be a professor myself. There's so much beyond teaching in a classroom, which in itself is very important, but also how the research, how the knowledge in the university is feeding the reports of the United Nations, the policies at the multilateral level, and even in different countries, particularly in Europe, how they're feeding public policies, how they're influencing government, and how to make things better, how to include actual science-based information. So we're talking about facts, we're talking about data, not talking about random criteria, but instead we're using the knowledge in universities to advance the goals that we need to advance. Of course, the UN predates the SDGs by a large margin, but in the core of the United Nations, actually, if you read the charter of the UN, Article 1, about the purposes of the UN, it actually mentions that the organization was created, in other things, to promote international global cooperation to solve problems of economic and social nature. It says that the UN is there to harmonize the actions of international community to attain these goals. So we are there not to unify the world. That's not our mandate. Our mandate is not to create a world government. Our mandate is not to create a single way of thinking. Our mandate is to find within the difference, and need a difference. But of course, every single member state will be one. We have 193 of them. Of course, we have at the very least 193 different ways of thinking and seeing the world. But we have common goals, and we have common problems that require common solutions. So what we're thinking here is about how to make these differences not as important that prevent us from finding common solutions. So the United Nations Academic Impact that was created has many different purposes. Our main goal is to engage institutions of higher education, to engage them with the UN. Actually, the previous verb, that was changed by me, by the way. The previous verb was aligning institutional higher education. I said, no, we're not aligning anybody. We want to engage you with us and us with you. So it's a symbiotic relationship that we want to foster. And as of now, I'm proud to say we have over 1,600 universities and colleges in 150 plus countries around the world, state members of the UN, plus the state of Palestine. So this is a very vast intellectual network. And we have seen probably from the corporate world, the private sector, this concept of corporate social responsibility. We speak from the UNEI side about intellectual social responsibility. Because there is a responsibility in universities. Universities are not in a Olimpo of knowledge divorced from reality or from society. What happens in universities and colleges does and should have an impact in the outside or beyond the campus, beyond the classrooms. I would like to think about this, but before I do that, I would like to also say something about the concept of sustainable development. And the concept of sustainable development is indeed important to us, but we have a problem with that. As some of people here that might be familiar with UN government technology, the UN, for a variety of reasons, mostly political ones, we do not have a definition about most of the things we work on. We don't have a definition of diplomacy, we don't have a definition of human rights, we don't have a definition of poverty, and we do not have a definition of sustainable development, which is weird, because that's everything we do right now. But again, there are political reasons behind that, and I can speak hours and hours about that, but we don't have the time. Having said that, even though we do not have a definition of sustainable development, most of us and most of the people outside of the UN tend to use a definition that is not an official definition, so it's called legally binding, but it's a definition that appeared in a document called the Report of the World Commission on Environment and Development, titled Our Common Future, from 1987. Now, there are two things important here to acknowledge. Number one, the most obvious, this is towards the end of the Cold War. So that that fact somehow influencing some of the languages you see there. But also, this is prior to the Rio Conference of 1992, which is the landmark of sustainable development when it comes to multilateral diplomacy. So those two things are important to keep in mind. But if you Google right now on your phones what sustainable development is, you probably will see something along the lines of what you read on the first couple of lines. So this definition has at least two, well, actually three components. One is about the needs. The second is about the ability to meet such needs. And the third is about the generational aspect. So sustainable development revolves about three different factors. What do we need to survive? What do we need to exist? What do we need to have a dignified life? That's the first. The second is, do we have the resources and do we have the capability to actually meet those needs? And the third, we're talking about the needs of the present generation, but also about the needs of the future generation that can be either one of two things, ourselves in the future term, or those who are coming behind us or after us. And I wanted to try to start with that because probably if you don't know anything about SDGs, but you have heard something about sustainable development, if I ask you right here right now, what did you think about sustainable development prior to the SDGs? I'm confident to say that probably 95% of the people will imagine something like protecting a tree or a wild animal, or about the forest, or about the jungle, which by the way is where I come from. I come from the Amazon region of my country. So most people tend to assume that sustainable development is somehow an ecological concept or an environmental concept, and that is false. The environment is a crucial factor of sustainable development, but it's not only about sustainable development. Actually, sustainable development is all about human beings. The human being is the center of the concept of sustainable development. And I go even beyond that. Sustainable development is just one framework of human rights protection. Because if you see sustainable development, if you see actually the SDGs one by one, is something related directly or indirectly to human rights and fundamental rights. And then this same paragraph, that's paragraph 27 actually of the report, which is very lengthy. If they say, they introduce a concept that the president of your university used this morning, leaving no one behind. And he said, extending to all the opportunity to fulfill their aspirations of life. So it's not only about meeting the basic needs. We are not talking here only about having shelter, food, electricity, water, and health, which is of course important. But once we have that, that's not the end of the journey. That's the beginning of the journey. Because beyond that, we also have the aspiration to have a better life for all of us. And that's at the core of what sustainable development means. Then we require that regardless of the ideology that we have in a certain country, we need to have a political systems that secure effective participation of citizens in decision making and formulation of public policy. And you listen carefully, I'm not saying participation for the sake of participation, I'm saying effective participation, that the actual voice of citizens is considered in the formulation and implementation of public policies. And the role of universities here is crucial because universities are one of the many vehicles that citizens have to have their voice heard. Then, and this is particularly important in certain countries, particularly with very large populations. We're talking about, for instance, India, that just surpassed China, the most populous country in the world. We need to really consider a balance between how the population is growing, the needs of that population, and the existence of resources to that actually allow meeting those needs. And then at the end, we can have all the information we want, we can have all the desire we want, but we need political will. And when I say political will, not only at the political level per se, not only at the level of the government, local, regional, national, we also need that political will in a place like this. If we want to have a sustainable university, that has to start with the top, with the leadership of the university, and that applies to every single institution, including private companies and the like. Then this was from 1987. not that much happened in terms of systematization or making sustainable development a less abstract concept or theory until we have the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals that were partially successful to a certain degree. And then, of course, all the negotiations that provoked the adoption of the SDGs in 2015. Currently enough, most people do not know that the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development not only is a list of the SDGs and the different targets, it also has a very comprehensive wording, out of which 2 paragraphs make very concrete references to academia. The first one says that governments and public institutions will work closely on implementation with academia and other stakeholders. I'm going to repeat that. Work closely on implementation. It's not about teaching about it. It's not creating awareness about it. It's working on actual implementation of the SDGs. So there's a specific role, with a specific mandate to universities. And then the academic and scientific community is mentioned in another paragraph saying that the journey in which governments, parliaments are involved towards achieving the SDGs will also include you, universities, and colleges. And by the way, I always laugh because apparently in English, the word agenda, my language is Spanish. In Spanish, agenda literally means we have a plan to achieve something. But in English, it has some conspiracy theories attached to the term, I believe, in English. But the word agenda was chosen because it literally means what I just said in Spanish. We have a set of goals and we have a plan to make those goals happen. So these are not just dreams of the general community. We actually have a way to achieve those goals, and we actually have a way to measure the progress that we are getting or not getting in order to achieve these goals. And then, of course, you have all seen these 17 SDGs, which are quite different from the MDGs. First, noticeable difference, there are many more. The MDGs were 8, now we have more than double of them. Also, the MDGs cover a very specific realm of actions. Here we have everything. And actually this is coming from the UN core. Everything you do on a daily basis is something related to the UN, including an airport is called international because there's an entity of the United Nations headquartered in Montreal in Canada that is the Agency for International Civil Aviation. Those are the ones in charge of seeing everything airlines and airports do around the world. That's just one example. So if you read all the names of the icons you see on the screen, it goes from poverty, and actually this is an interesting point. The report I was just referring to from 1987 says that poverty, it doesn't say that, I'm paraphrasing. Poverty is the root cause of all the problems related to sustainable development. It says something else. It says, and I quote, where poverty is endemic, and it uses that terminology, you will see more catastrophes of ecological nature and all of that. If you look at the map of the world, and you see where you have more poverty or where poverty is more prevalent, and you put above that a map of the world where you have more violence and conflict, and you put above that a map of the world in which countries are less resilient to natural disasters, you will find that the gold maps will be very similar. And that's not a coincidence. So poverty, and actually I remember this report in Under Freedom from the former Secretary General Kofi Annan that said, if you don't have development, and development not only understood as the increasing the GDP of a country, development understood from a general perspective, like the one we're talking about here. If you have poverty, most likely you're not respecting human rights. And if you don't have that, you will not have peace. So this triangle that seems pretty obvious, for some people, you know, the understanding of that is still difficult. This is why, on purpose, SDG number 1 is poverty. Poverty is the root cause of all the social problems in the world. So if you read that backwards, if you solve poverty, it's very likely that you will solve all of the problems that you solve. And as you can see, the first 6 SDGs are mostly about basic needs. The other are about our role in the world compared to 13, 14, and 15 that are about the biodiversity and our actions and how they affect the world in which we live. My personal favorite is number 16, which is all about pure human rights, fight against corruption and misappropriation of public funds, and fight to greater access to public information. And then one goal that is probably the least understood and one of the more complicated ones actually, which is a simple fact. Actually, the MDGs, the last MDG number 8 is something similar to this 17 here of the MDGs. Governments cannot do everything on their own. Governments need to work with other governments. Government needs to work with the private sector. Government needs to work with civil society. And finally, governments need to work with universities and colleges. This is a message from the Deputy Secretary General in which she highlights the specific role that universities have in today's world, considering the global challenges that we have. Actually, I can share the presentation if somebody is interested in having it. And this is a message from the Secretary General of the United Nations and I would like to draw your attention to the second paragraph actually. It says, we call on universities, through your teaching, through your research, through your innovation, to do your part to help us and help the world to achieve the sustainable development goals. So what about universities? And these are just few examples on the many times in the actual 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in which you read the words research, science, technology, higher education. So in many ways, for example, this is about hunger, this is about health, quality education, of course, actually this is quite interesting. Goal number 4, which is about quality education, has at least 3 specific references to universities. 1, you have to guarantee equal access to universities for all, despite the fact, and this can be debated, the right to education does not technically include higher education. This particular SDG is telling us, well, you have to guarantee as an institution of higher education, as a government, you have to guarantee that everybody has equal access to higher education. You have to also guarantee that women are incorporated in universities. So you need to tell me in university how many female students do you have, how many female professors do you have, how many female professors do you have, and how many female authorities do you have in the leadership of the university. This is my absolute favorite. This is target 4.7 of SDG 4. It basically says, it doesn't matter what we're teaching. It doesn't matter what we're studying. The university has to provide the basic knowledge and basic literacy about sustainable development. They have to. And that includes a number of things, including gender equality, human rights, global citizenship, which is, by the way, one of the core mandates that we have in the UN academic campus. And I used to complain, the student that Lenien that introduced me, she mentioned I was a professor of international human rights law, and that was in the law school in the university where I used to teach. And I always complain about one simple fact. In a country like mine, and don't quote me on that list, with a human rights sui generis situation, it is unthinkable that unless you are studying law, if you're studying literally anything else, civil engineering, for instance, you don't have any information whatsoever about human rights, literally nothing. You don't know anything unless you have a personal interest in that. Well, breaking news, human rights is not a legal thing. It has a legal aspect, it has a legal component. But human rights are our rights. Not only the lawyers have human rights. You don't have to be a lawyer to understand human rights. You don't have to be a lawyer to understand what you have to do if you feel or you know for sure that your rights are being violated. This is actually going to address that problem. It doesn't matter if you're studying medicine, architecture, computer science, that in principle actually do not have anything to do with human rights, but human rights are for all. Hence, we all have to know about human rights. We all have to know about global citizenship. We all have to know about gender equality, and we all have to know about sustainable development. And actually, and I said this in a lecture not that long ago, at least in the global north, which is where we are, not where I come from, the students are demanding that for two reasons. One, because they have more awareness about sustainable development than we do. That's the first. Number two, because the private sector, and this is actually very interesting, the private sector is demanding professionals with sustainable development skills. So they need professionals, they need graduates that actually know about sustainable development. And private sector companies want that for two reasons. Either because they believe in it, I would say that's the lesser percentage, or because for public image purposes, they want to portray themselves as greener company because now everything fashionable is greener, sustainable, and they need to prove that. And they need to change the way they operate, they need to change the way they produce things. And for that, they need professionals that know about sustainable development and how to incorporate sustainability in the actual day-to-day operations of a company, for instance, or an institution. It's about scholarships, and then, of course, the role of universities on clean and affordable energy, on industry, innovation, and infrastructure, which is really obvious. Possible consumption and production, even life below water. Actually, in particular, this goal related to the condition of the oceans and biodiversity below water. The extreme importance of research conducted in universities cannot be underestimated. We need that to produce the policies we need in order to achieve the targets within this specific goal. And as you can see, it's mentioned many times the word science, research, and so on. Now, as a university, Monmouth University, or any university for that matter, what a simple university can do? Well, first, you have to implement policies on campus. Because if you're going to talk about sustainability, you have to lead by example. You have to do your own cleaning in-house. Many universities around the world are doing that. Many universities have transformed everything from energy consumption to the way they do procurement, actually. Many universities create awareness, both on campus and beyond, using their various communication tools. Of course, the main reason universities exist, they educate about sustainable development, but also universities provide training to other people outside of the walls of the university about sustainable development. Universities collect data, including the use of surveys and social studies. Of course, universities, those here in the house, professors know this well. They conduct research, valuable research that governments either do not have the expertise to conduct, or don't have the funds to conduct, or have the means to conduct. That data and that information gathered is analyzed also in-house in universities. In some countries, and some parts of the US actually, universities actually draft legislation, even at the local level. Universities can actually propose things to lawmakers, and I'm sorry to say, most lawmakers, I believe I can speak generally about this, not only in my home country or Latin America, but around the world. Lawmakers are not experts necessarily in sustainable development issues. So draft legislation might be a very interesting and important, even crucial thing that universities can provide to their governments, even at the local level. And of course, universities provide policy advice. In Europe, this is very well developed. Many countries in Europe heavily rely on the expertise of universities to formulate policies. Then, of course, we can say many more things. For instance, universities connect with communities. For instance, universities connect with students even at the high school level, as it was mentioned earlier. Not only do you deal with college students on a regular basis, but also with students in the level levels of education. And also, let's not forget teachers in high schools and elementary school are trained in universities. So it starts with that. In the end, if you are the student, if you are a researcher, if you are a professor whose main responsibility is teaching, you have a voice. So what would you do next? What would you do to change the world? What would you do to leave no one behind as a president of the university certified? What would you do to have a better life for you and for your kids? And I think
That was really wow.
Hmm.
Mostly, if you were here this morning with the high-level webinar, which our esteemed colleague here, Tony McDonald, moderated, and another colleague sitting in the back who's been a champion of sustainability teaching or climate change teaching. She started the Teach-Ins series at Monmouth. The running theme or the takeaway from that session was impact. And just listening to Omar now, as an educator, that is going to be my takeaway from his speech as well, is impact. So the last question you asked in terms of what will we do next, that's the question that I'm going to ask myself. What impact am I having on my students, on my community, on my surrounding, on myself as well, right? So I think as a symposium planner, that gives us tremendous hope that this is all aligning and engaging with the UN SDGs. In particular, Omar, I have to say, if I may call you so, we go a long way back, met you first maybe almost 10 years ago. I am so glad that you mentioned goal number 14, because with the Urban Coast Institute here, Tony would not let me rest in peace if that goal was not referred to. So thank you for that. And also, I loved that little round click you kept checking. I had to learn how to do that, right? And that aligns with the SDGs as well. So I don't know how you do that, but that's something for the dinner and reception talk, which you're all invited to, and we should continue this conversation. We do have a few minutes for any questions from the floor. Anybody has any comments or questions? You would have to really project.
First, thank you so much for your time today and for sharing your remarks. Part of your talk was really compelling around this idea of poverty eradication. So that poverty being marked as a core source of issue, problem, accountability. So sociologist Matt Desmond has been writing recently about poverty abolition. My question for you comes from a comment he made that we, at least in the global north, have the ability to end poverty, but we don't. And it's mostly because we don't hate it enough. We're not against it enough to do what's required to get rid of it. Do you think that's the issue on the global scale? So is it possible that we have the means to eradicate poverty globally and we don't because we benefit, some people benefit from the existence of poverty?
Excuse me, 1 second.
Yeah.
Professor Taylor, just for the benefit of our online listeners or those who are watching, maybe I'll try to summarize, and Omar, if you don't mind, you come here and respond to that, that would be great. So if I try to summarize in a very ineloquent fashion my colleague Claude Taylor's question, so poverty abolition or removal of poverty or zero hunger can also be associated with that. we all know of the disparity in resources regarding poverty and other resources that cause poverty. So what I got from that question was those in the wealthier regions, and I think we are reaching a world where we cannot just say the global north and global south in terms of discriminating against poverty or looking at the world in terms of disparities. Many of the countries in the south are catching up quickly, which is a good thing. But regardless, the question is those who have, it's like the haves and have-nots question. Those who have, are they lacking the intention, the willingness, the purposiveness of eradicating or removing poverty? Is that the case, or is there something more? That's what I got from your question, Mark.
We have to keep in mind some simple facts. And thank you so much for that question. When we're here in this symposium discussing about sustainable development and poverty, there are millions around the world that have no clue where they're going to sleep this evening, if they're going to eat this evening, if they're going to be alive tomorrow. People that are suffering from preventable diseases and are receiving basic health care, that are being discriminated because they belong to a specific ethnicity, or they belong to a specific religion, or they come from a specific country, they belong to a specific sexual minority, or the like. So it is important to realize that perhaps we are not focusing the problem on us. We are focusing the problem on them, and they are not the problem. Problem is us. Problem is that we are not considering their faces, their life, when we're saying things about poverty. That's the first thing. The second thing is pretty obvious: lack of political will. If we have political will, and I come from the global south, so some people in the global south, and I'm not particularly happy about that term, but let's use it for the sake of discussion. Some people in the global south say that's the problem with the poverty here is there. No. In the global south, we have corruption. In the global south, we have political instability. In the global south, we have many problems. But there's also a problem of redistribution of wealth. There's also a problem of waste of wealth. And let's use the original division inequality as an example. You know how much money is spent daily in both parts of the situation, in weapons. And I always imagine myself, how much of that money could go to solve hunger in Mauritania, for instance, just to name one country. And then the amount of money wasted in these kind of things, and while we are wasting our time, and I'm all into doing things for technology, but how much investment is being done in technology that is not going to help a single human being, but perhaps quite the opposite, instead of using that money in technology that can actually help to, I don't know, increase the crops in countries where severe drought. I'm not an expert in economy, 90% by the way, just an ignorant thought perhaps. But political will probably is the answer to that. Poverty could be eradicated from the face of the earth. Actually, this is the fun and sad fact, by the way. If you read goal number 1 about no poverty, actually the goal is not about eliminating poverty in absolute terms, because that's impossible. Target number 1, point 1 of goal 1 says eliminating the proportion of people that lives below the international poverty line, which is established in $1.25 per day. It seems pretty simple. We are not talking about eliminating poverty, extreme poverty. And even that, I'm sorry to say, we are far behind. Because we were kind of okay in certain countries until COVID-19 happened. And then when we thought, well, we are transitioning away from COVID-19, then, well, Ukraine happened. So we are transitioning from one crisis to the other. And the problems that were there prior to Ukraine and prior to COVID-19, those are still there and are worse. So, and this might sound as a cliche, and I fully understand that it happens to be true. In moments of crisis, we have to reinvent ourselves. We have to come with actual thinkable solutions. And actually, I believe universities are incubators of these ideas and solutions. It can really have the power to help others. I have seen poverty in my own country that you've never seen probably unless you are coming from outside of the US. I live in New York where I see poverty on a daily basis, but absolutely not compared to what you can see in the global south. And yet, I live in New York and I say, how you can have poverty in a city like New York, which I read somewhere has the largest proportion of billionaires in the entire United States. So that is a little bit confusing for me as a foreigner. I'm not American by means, but this is interesting for me. I can understand kind of poverty in my own country, not the American in general, but the US is a little bit hard to grasp, perhaps. So I'm sorry for the very late lengthy response, but political lack of is probably the cause. Thank you. Thank you. I don't know if anyone else has a question. Mary.
I'm a scientist and I work with a humanities professor. And humanities are excellent for developing empathy. And I agree with you, and my students of climate change agree with you that the problem is lack of political will, perhaps stemming from lack of empathy. In universities, would you favor more interdisciplinary study of humanities to promote empathy?
So for the benefit of those hearing online, so you're asking if the disciplinary approach of humanities can benefit the cause of sustainability?
Yeah.
100% yes. The UN, we in the UN, let me give you an example about how we you have the IPCC, which I mentioned. This is a bunch of prominent scientists and experts from around the world. But let me give you a personal touch to it. I was the one who drafted my dad's PhD thesis on electrochemistry. I am coming from international law related background. I know literally nothing about chemistry, literally nothing. But I was the one who drafted my dad's thesis for one reason. My dad absolutely no clue how to write 2 lines for somebody who is not like this. And my mom is also like that, so she couldn't help me. So both my parents are scientists, and they don't know how to write to somebody on the street that knows nothing about it. And for things like climate change, you need to translate things not only for people to understand and create awareness about it, but also for people to put public pressure on the lawmakers, on government officials, and the like, and governments themselves, and the sector and so on. So in the UN, we do that. We work with our colleagues in IPCC, who are scientists, and we, the Department of Global Communications, we translate that to communicate to celebrities, and we work, for example, with Leo DiCaprio, who is a special piece of our department for climate change, and we work with high school, and we work with universities, and we work with the global compact with the private sector and so on. So we translate that information. And that's just one example of how important interdisciplinarity is to translate message, for example. But also, I believe to create empathy, some people are just working in silos, and I'm working on this, and this is the only thing I do, and I don't see beyond that. And I believe the role of the university goes beyond that, and I believe universities are in an excellent place because unless you're a very technical university, most likely you have a bunch of different schools, programs of different nature. That's the beauty of it, because the university can use the efforts of all the different components of the university to work for the common good. Only very few institutions like the UN have that capability. Universities, and how many do we have in the world? Hundreds of thousands. So, to your question, yes, we do need more interdisciplinarity, and I believe that the academic arena has shown in the past few years that conceptualization of science and something completely hard science, not basic science, but something completely separated from the rest is something, is a traditional viewpoint that is no longer applicable to today's world, to today's standard. Yes.
So thank you so much for coming today. I'm Sanjana Raghunathan from the School of Social Work. I'm a social worker by training. I am the Secretary of the UN NGO Committee on Migration. And I just wanted to talk to you about, in one of your first slides, you mentioned implementation as part of the university role. I'm very interested in that because as a social worker, we do research, we have ideas, we have skill set, but there is a disconnect with regards to the implementation. And I see on the ground, like climate change, for example, with Bangladesh, people being displaced, migration is my area of interest, people being displaced. There is science around growing rice in salt water now. But the thing is that it is not reachable, attainable for the people, right? So there are research institutes that are doing the work, but then how do we make it available, the implementation piece, right? So could you talk a little bit more about that? Because I'm really, it'll be a great experience for our students, for all students to be able to show them the, the theories and everything, but then also the practical.
Yeah. So the question is about how to make implementation work actually in reality and the role of universities there. This depends on where are we talking about that. As I said, some countries are more prone to include universities in the formulation of policies and implementation of policies. Some countries are not that open. But even in the countries that are not that open, there is room and there is opportunity there. Universities have to be at the forefront of that. They have to push for it because the governments will not knock on the door of universities. That will not happen. It has to be the other way around. And it has to be very pushy, I'm afraid. We are doing our best, actually one of our plans for this year and next year, to have a briefing with members of the UN in New York and tell them that actually we're moving towards that direction. That this teaching, research, community engagement that the universities conduct on a regular basis, they have to serve a purpose larger than that. And they have to feed into the policies designed by governments at all levels. But I'm afraid to say that there's a certain level of resistance because of many reasons. Accountability, because, well, there's going to be more oversight if governments include all the stakeholders there. They won't have the only say in things. Also because fear of displacement of expertise. I mean, there are many reasons why a government will be a little bit reluctant to allow universities to come in. But we have seen very good examples of that in many countries. Sadly, though, mostly in the global north. But I have seen, for example, in Suriname, we have an example. Suriname, which is not far from my hometown, we have 4 Guyanas. I'm from the Spanish Guyana, then we have the British one, the Dutch one, and the French one. The Dutch one now, the Republic of Suriname, they have only one university, and because of us being very pushy, they are now connecting with UNDP, the UN country office in Paramaribo, and they are connecting with the government of Suriname for something very specific, which is to collect data and analyze statistics, because the government doesn't have the capability of doing that. The university does, through their professors and researchers. That's a very concrete, simple example. And they were very pushy, and the government at the end said, well, let's give it a trial, and it has worked. So that's one very good example.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm sorry to interject here. I know some of you had questions, but in the interest of time, and also as a mark of a good symposium, let the conversation continue over onto the library, where we have our reception soon after. Hope you all join us. Thank you for such an engaging and spirited presentation, and thank you so much. Len, would you help us thank our guest and keynote speaker again? Thank you. Before we disperse for the day, again, thank you, Omar, for that brilliant and really engaging presentation. We would not have been able to have this symposium without the help of many people, and I will not be able to thank all of them, but at least the committee, I have to recognize some of them have left the room, but you know how difficult it is and challenging it is to synchronize an in-person, hybrid, and online components of post-COVID symposia. And this conference, this symposium would not have been possible without all of the technological help of our media operations, and especially from our end, from the committee's perspective, Carl Bilakova and Alia Satku. Both of them worked tirelessly and cheerfully to make all of this happen. All of the beautiful things that you see, including the name tags, are all their contributions. So I wanted to thank them especially. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Rich, White, and I don't see my other co-conspirators here, Anna Sadarnikova of the business school, Jiang Kim, who you met this morning from the School of Education, Nikita Barros from the School of Science, and you will see all of them again tomorrow. Please join in from the comforts of your home with your coffee, your morning breakfast. It's all virtual sessions. We'll start off at 9 o'clock with a conveners panel, and we'll follow the same trajectory of the different tracks. So that'll probably help us see. We also have visitors from University of Lapland in Finland. We have visitors from John Jay College and all other visitors who I do not recognize personally. Thank you all and all my colleagues here at Monmouth. We had a really wonderful day with your help and cooperation. Please join us. In order to sustain ourselves, we have to take care of ourselves. So now is the time to relax, have some good food and music in the library, beautiful grounds of library. I'd like to invite you all to come and join us. Thank again our speaker. That was really wonderful. He has a lot of things to think about and to do the next steps. So thank you.